Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today is April 15th, normally tax day, so your parents would be freaking out, but they extended that to July, so that's a good thing for, no stress for mom and dad. And today we're going to be studying the quadratic formula. You get to hear me sing. I know you'll be excited about that. If you look right there, it says we have a Zoom meeting tomorrow at 1. And on our Zoom meeting, I'll be taking questions on the last couple of lessons and or questions about what's going to happen for fourth quarter. And I don't have all the answers for that yet, but I can kind of give you some guidance. And what happened with the end of the third quarter. Once again, your grades are being calculated at this point in time, and they'll be going on the report card. If you look at School Tool today, it should be about where you're going to be for the quarter. I don't know whether it's good news or bad news for you, but that's where we're at. Okay, so last time we were looking at the vertex form of a parabola, and your homework was on page 47. All right, and taking a look at page 47, this is what we got going on there. Once again, this is what's known as a parent function, y equals x squared, and we should know how to graph that like in our sleep at this point. And that would have a vertex at 0, 0. And an axis of symmetry is x equals 0. All right, and goes out 1 and up 1, and out 2 and up 4, etc. Then it says what happens, what happens when we add or subtract stuff. So they give us a plus 3. When you do the plus 3, if you stuffed it in your calculator, you'd see that it would shift 3 units to the left. So that would mean its axis of symmetry is at x equals negative 3, and that's once again a translation. And we're going to find out more about that in our next unit, which is the final unit on functions. How exciting. And if we do the minus 1, it goes 1 unit to the right. Okay, and it's kind of contrary to what you think. So you add something and it moves toward the negatives. You subtract something, it moves towards the positives. And if you remember, that's because when you have that vertex form of the parabola, it's x minus h squared plus k. Notice how you have that sign change here, and it winds up with a vertex of h comma k. Okay, so the h moves it left or right, the k moves it up or down. All right, and then they just ask the coordinates of the turning points. So that's where I got the negative 3, 0 and the 1, 0. They could have just changed that and said, what is the equation of the axis of symmetry? Remember, the axis of symmetry is an equation, so it has to have an equal sign. So the axis would be x equals negative 3 or x equals 1. And then for the center part, you got the sign flip thing going on. All right, so you see that we have the negative 8 becomes 8, and then 5 stays the same. Negative plus 1 becomes negative 1. Sign stays the same on the y coordinate, and then sign flip on the 3 and keep the sign on the other. Simple as that. Once again, this has no effect on the vertex. At negative 2. That would flip it over. If we went to graph this, it would be something like this. Let me see if I can get this right. Oh, that's an ugly one. It would be something down here. Okay, so this would be x equals 3. That would be at negative 10. It would open downward. Down the bottom, they want us to do the conversion. I'm going to do that last one for you, but if you convert this one, it should be here. So you'd have negative 3 comma negative 11. This one would be at 1 comma 10. And this one, we don't know yet. All right, so to do this, once again, we slide the 27 out and give ourselves some space so we can complete the square. When we complete the square, we take half of negative 10, and that's going to be negative 5. And then we square that, so it's b over 2 squared, and that's going to give me 25. So it's always positive. Okay, whatever goes inside the parentheses is always positive. Plus 25. And if I add 25 here, I have to balance it out. So I'm going to subtract 25 on the outside. And that's going to give me, once again, this is my perfect square by construction. And that's going to give me y equals x minus 5 squared plus 2. 27 minus 25 gives me a 2. So my vertex here is at 5, comma 2. And we're done. All right, many of you are doing the delta on this. Once again, whichever one you choose is fine with me. What we did skip on here, if you remember, we skipped a whole bunch of pages in the midst of this thing. And that was having to do with the wonderful world of if they give you a list, how do you write the equation for it? And it really is a calculator problem. And a lot of times, a lot of us don't have the calculators. So I didn't want to spend time flipping through that when we don't have it. All right, so that's why we're skipping those pages. We are going on to page 55. Now, my pages here are going to look a little bit different than what you print out because it didn't like this and it didn't like that. So mine's looks a little bit different, but you'll see everything we need to see here. And I need to go grab a calculator. So I'm going to pause for a second and grab that calculator, and you probably won't notice it. Okay, I'm back. All right, now once again, this looks a little bit different, but you're going to have the same information. I just took a look at the equation. Well, let's answer the questions up at the top, Mr. Douglas. You're skipping things. That's not good. It says, solving quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. It says, can you solve x squared minus 9x plus 5 by factoring? Well, if you can, you're much better than I am, so that's a no. And then it says, can you solve it by completing the square? And that should be a yes, I hope. Okay, if we did that, once again, you'd move the 5 to the other side, half of the 9, square it, blah, 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 and it would come out and it would be an ugly number. We're going to find out that that's going to be an irrational number. And we're going to study that a little bit more when we get into that next unit, okay? But for now, that's all we need to think about. All right, so back in the day, when I learned how to use the quadratic formula, I had to derive the quadratic formula from this. I had to make this look like that, all right? You don't have to do that, so say, thank you, Mr. Douglas. You're welcome. All right, but the quadratic formula will work every time. So if you're bad at that factoring thing that we did in the beginning of this unit or the end of last unit, if you're bad at that completing the square thing, this will work every time. And this is on your formula sheet. Yay us. All right, so looking at this, you have B's and A's and C's. Well, where do we get that? Well, there's the A, there's the B, there's the C. Okay? And identify them. So I have the 1, x squared, that's where the 1 comes from. I have negative 9. It's important that you pick up on that sign right there. So I have that negative on the 9, and then I have a positive 5. And then you just plug into the formula. Now I said I was going to sing, and that's because I had to memorize this when I got to use it. And it's pop goes the weasel. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right. Now, you don't need to memorize it, but once again, it helps me to make sure I do everything right. Things that are important here, remember you have a negative on that b. Remember it has to be plus or minus. That gives you the 2 roots. And then b squared. And we're going to talk about that b squared quite at length when we get to it. All right, so I'm going to plug numbers in. I'm going to bring this down. That negative 9 gets here. And notice how I have negative from the formula. That's from the formula. And this is from the equation. So I'm going to have a negative, negative, which is going to turn into a positive. But I want to write it out so I see it. Then underneath the square root, I'm going to put inside parentheses, negative 9 squared. And that's going to be minus 4. Once again, the 4 is right there from the formula. And then the a is equal to 1, and the a is equal to 1 a lot, but pay attention to that because sometimes it's not. And then times 5. All right, and that's going to be over 2 times 1. All right, now you could type this whole thing into your calculator with a plus sign, and then this whole thing into your calculator with a minus sign. I strongly suggest you don't do that. Okay, a couple of reasons why. First of all, this is irrational, and they're going to ask you to do it in simplest radical form eventually, so you might as well get in this habit first. The first thing you want to do is put what is ever underneath here in the calculator. So put under, once again, that's called a radical in calculator first. And this has a special name, and you'll be using it a lot next year, so I'm going to tell you what it is now. It's called the discriminant. Discriminant. Okay. And you plug that in your calculator. Now watch when I plug this into the calculator. You want to be careful when you do this, and I think some of you already know that. Oh, I should just get myself a new document. All right. And when you do this, you have to put the parentheses on. Why do I have to put parentheses? Watch. If I do negative 9 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, it tells me it's negative 101. Okay? Which is wrong. Okay? Because a negative square root, that means you'd have an imaginary solution, which it doesn't. All right? So we're going to do parenthesis, negative 9, close the parenthesis, square the outside, minus 4, that's a plus, we don't want a plus, I'll delete that, times 1 times 5, enter, 61. Okay, so that means I get negative negative over here from on the 9 gives me a positive 9 plus or minus the square root of 61 over 2 times 1 is just 2. Okay, so square root of 61 is not a nice number. I think everybody can agree on that. If you put it in your calculator, let's see what you get. You do control square root 61, yuck, 7.81, blah, 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 blah. We don't want to do that yet. We want to do it all together now. But if I do that, and actually I did this with my calculator, with my calculator I can use the printer for, so let me show you what happened with that. So there's my 61. And then I didn't even do the minus or negative. I just did, or I didn't change that to a positive, I did minus the negative, just so you see again. I typed the rest of it in, and I got 8.40512. All right, and then when I changed it, I put it in with a negative, I got 0.59, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to be rounding to the nearest hundredth, okay? So if I do that, I'm going to have 8.41, comma, and 0.59. You could write it in either order, it doesn't matter. And once again, we're going to round it to 2 decimal places. And so point blah blah. 2 decimal places when we do this. Even if I don't tell you, that's what I'm expecting right now. Kind of like dollars and cents, 2 decimal places, unless it tells you to do otherwise. So once again, be careful when you key this in. You have to make sure that it looks like this once you key it in. If you do it badly, like if you don't do it right, it'll look like this. Actually, I'll do it for you so you can see. If I do 9, that's not what I wanted. If I do 9 and I do plus, and I do the control square root 61, and remember to arrow out to get from underneath that, and I do that divided by 2, I get something different, because notice what it looks like. It doesn't look like this with the fraction bar all the way across. The fraction bar is only underneath the 2 because I didn't do it quite right. All right, so you got to make sure you either put parentheses around the top or use your fraction bar. Remember, get your fraction bar. It's here next to the 9, and it's right in that first position there. Okay, all right. So that's the process that we're going through now. Sometimes it's going to come out and it's going to be a nice number. All right. And some of you may even recognize it. Hey, wait a minute, I can factor that. Well, we want to practice the quadratic formula, just like we wanted to practice completing the square. So we're not going to do that, even if we can say, oh, I can factor that. All right, so here we go. Flipping over to the next page. All right, I'm going to do 3 examples for you here today. And then your work is going to be on 56 and 57. Once again, if the quadratic formula isn't printed on the page, you should write it on the page. All right, so here we go. And I know I have a 1 there, so that's a 1. I have a 1 there, so that's a 1. I have a negative 12. So I get x equals big fraction bar, negative from the formula, 1 plus minus big square root, and I'm going to do 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12, all over 2 times 1. Okay. I don't think I did that in my calculator. Oh, yes, I did. Oh, cool. All right, so in my calculator, I typed in 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12, and that gave me 49. So over here, I should do negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 2. All right, and hopefully, well, you could type it in your calculator if you want, but hopefully you know that the square root of 49 is 7, so I could rewrite this as negative 1 plus or minus 7 over 2. That would give me 2 solutions, and I think you saw it on the page. If I do negative 1 plus 7 over 2, that's going to give me 3, because negative 1 plus 7 is 6, divided by 2 is 3. Then I have negative 1 minus 7 over 2, and that's going to give me negative 4. Once again, you should write your final answer in really bad squirrely brackets, and that's going to give me 3 comma negative 4. Smiley face, move on. Okay. All right, I'm going to do 2 more for you. And sometimes you think it's going to be rational, it's not. Sometimes it's, well, we'll see what happens. This time I have a 2, an 8, and a 3. So I get x equals negative 8 plus or minus big square root 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times 3 all over 2 times 2 equals negative 8 plus or minus, let's see, that's going to be 64 minus 24, square root of 40 over 4. Okay, now the square root of 40 is not rational. Another thing you don't want to do is say, oh, that's going to be 40 divided by 4 is going to give me 10. That's not true either. Okay, can't do that. But you can put it in your calculator. And I thought I did that, but apparently I didn't. So we will do that right now. And once again, when you turn on your calculator, first thing you want to do is the fraction bar. And enter. And I'm going to do negative 8. Make sure you don't do minus 8. And I'm going to do plus control square root 40. Arrow down to go to the bottom over 4. Enter. And that's going to give me my first solution, which is negative 0.42. Remember all those numbers. If you can't read it, it's 0.4188611699916. Not very helpful. And then I go arrow up, and I arrow up, and I hit enter. And now I just arrow back, and I change that plus sign there to a minus sign. So delete and minus and enter. And that gives me negative 3.58. Squirrely bracket. Okay. And that's what you do. All right. So one more, and then you get the thrill, honor, and privilege of doing it yourself. I get a 1, a negative 6, negative 5. X equals negative 6 plus or minus big square root parenthesis negative 6 close parenthesis squared plus 4 times 1 times negative 5 or 2 times 1 equals, got double negative there, so that's going to be a positive 6 plus or minus square root. If you put this in your calculator, you'd wind up with 36 plus, oh, this should be a minus sign, Mr. Douglas. Sorry about that. I was thinking about negative thing, but that's okay. All right, so 36 plus 20 gives me 56 over 2. And put it in my calculator again. And I get my fraction bar going. And I do 6 plus control square root 56 divided by 2. And that's going to give me a 0.74, comma, arrow, arrow, enter, change it to a minus, delete minus, enter, Ooh, okay. So that top one was actually 6.74. Sorry about that. And this one is negative 0.74. A little bit of glare on my thing there. Okay. I hope that works for you. That's using the quadratic formula. Once again, your homework is pages 57 or 58. And I do believe that there's a delta assignment available for that. And hopefully you can wander your way through that. Once again, this will be due by Friday. So it'll be on time. And on Friday, we're going to be doing word problems. So hopefully you'll tune in for that one, and we'll keep moving forward. And then the next class after that will be on Tuesday. Once again, Zoom meeting tomorrow at 1 p.m. Hope to talk to you then. See your smiling faces, and have yourselves a great day.